The year is 1795. The French Revolution, which began with cries for liberty, has drowned in a sea of blood. The guillotine's blade is still. The reign of terror is over. In its place stands a weak, corrupt, and bankrupt government known as the Directory. France is broken, surrounded by enemies, and ungovernable. The people are desperate, not for a king, not for a committee, but for a savior. They would get one. But he would not be a nobleman from Paris or a politician from the old regime. He was an outsider. A young, ambitious, and utterly ruthless soldier from a rocky island in the Mediterranean. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. And this is the story of his unstoppable rise. Napoleon was not by birth French. He was born Napoleon de Bonaparte in 1769 in Corsica, an island that had been conquered by France just 1 year earlier. He was, in every sense, an outsider. His minor noble family had little money, but they scraped enough together to send him to military academy in mainland France. He was a poor fit. He was short, spoke French with a thick Corsican accent, and was relentlessly mocked by his aristocratic classmates. But while they practiced their etiquette, Napoleon buried himself in books. He devoured the works of Caesar and Alexander the Great. He was a social outcast, but a mathematical genius. He found his true calling not in the salon, but in 1789. The French Revolution exploded. For the young, status-obsessed nobles at his school, it was the end of their world. For Napoleon, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. The revolution shattered the old rules. The entire aristocratic officer corps either fled the country or was executed. Suddenly, advancement was based not on blood, but on talent. And Napoleon had talent. His first chance came in 1793 at the Siege of Toulon. The port city had rebelled and was being protected by the British fleet. The Republican army was stuck. Napoleon, a mere captain, devised a brilliant and daring plan. He argued that by seizing the high ground overlooking the harbor, their cannons could rain fire on the British ships, forcing them to flee. His superiors were skeptical, but they let him try. Napoleon led the charge himself, suffering a bayonet wound to the thigh. The plan worked. The British fled. At just 24 years old, Napoleon Bonaparte was promoted to brigadier general. But his rise was not a straight line. After the fall of his political patrons, Napoleon was sidelined, penniless, and desperate in Paris. His career seemed over. Then, in October 1795, opportunity struck again. A massive royalist mob rose up in Paris to overthrow the Directory. The government was in a panic. They had no one to defend them, until one politician remembered the little Corsican from Toulon. Napoleon was given command. He acted with terrifying speed. He ordered his men to seize the city's cannons and line the streets. As the 25,000 royalists marched on the Tuileries Palace, Napoleon gave a simple, brutal order: fire. He cleared the streets with what he famously called a whiff of grapeshot. Thousands were killed. The rebellion was crushed. The Directory was saved. Napoleon was no longer just a promising general. He was the savior of the Republic. He was given a new name: General Vendémiaire. As a reward, the Directory gave Napoleon command of the Army of Italy. It was a joke. A starving, ragged, and mutinous band of 30,000 men with no supplies, sent on an impossible mission against the might of the Austrian Empire. But what the Directory saw as a backwater, Napoleon saw as a stage. He arrived and gave one of the most famous speeches in military history. "Soldiers, you are hungry and naked. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces and great cities will be in your power. There you will find honor, glory, and riches." He was a master of psychology. He was fast, unpredictable, and brilliant. In a lightning campaign in 1796, he shattered the Austrian armies, time and time again, often against vastly superior numbers. He became a legend. He wrote his own dispatches back to Paris, exaggerating his victories. He founded newspapers dedicated to him. He stole priceless Italian art and sent it back to Paris. He was no longer just a general. He was a superstar. He returned to France as the most famous and beloved man in the nation. Back in Paris, the Directory was now terrified of him. He was too popular, too powerful. They had to get him out of the city. So, they agreed to his wild, ambitious plan to invade Egypt. The Egyptian campaign of 1798 was, militarily, a disaster. He won battles against the Mamluks at the pyramids. But his fleet was cornered and annihilated by the British admiral, Horatio Nelson, at the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon and his army were trapped. But Napoleon was a master of public relations. He had brought an army of scientists and scholars with him. They discovered the Rosetta Stone, unlocking the secrets of hieroglyphics. While he was losing the war, he was winning the headlines. He portrayed the expedition as a grand scientific and cultural triumph.
Silence!
While trapped in Egypt, Napoleon received news from France. The Directory was collapsing. The economy was in ruins, and a new coalition of enemies was threatening to invade. Napoleon saw his moment. In 1799, he abandoned his entire army and secretly sailed back to France. He violated quarantine, dodged the British fleet, and when he landed, he was hailed as a returning hero. The public didn't know he'd been defeated. They only knew that the one man who knew how to win was back. In Paris, he conspired with 2 members of the Directory to overthrow it. The plot was the Coup of 18 Brumaire. It was a clumsy, near-disastrous affair. When Napoleon tried to address the government, the politicians, sensing a coup, shouted him down, calling him a traitor and an outlaw. He panicked and fled the chamber. It was his brother, Lucien, who saved him. Lucien, president of the council, ran outside to the soldiers and lied, claiming the politicians had tried to assassinate their general. Enraged, the soldiers marched into the chamber and, with bayonets fixed, cleared the hall. The Directory was dead. A new government was formed, the Consulate. 3 men would rule France, but one would be First Consul. And that, of course, was Napoleon Bonaparte. In a single day, he had become the most powerful man in France. The rise was complete. He would move quickly to consolidate his power. He would reform the laws with the Napoleonic Code, reorganize the bank, and stabilize the nation. The people, exhausted by a decade of revolution and chaos, gladly traded their liberty for order. In 1804, he would make his power permanent. In a grand ceremony at Notre Dame, he would take the imperial crown from the hands of the Pope and place it on his own head. The little Corsican outsider, the mocked artillery officer, the child of the Revolution, was now Napoleon I, Emperor of the French. He had ended the French Revolution by becoming its master. He had risen to the very pinnacle of power, but a continent would not bow to him so easily. The story of his reign and his legendary fall was just beginning. Napoleon's rise was one of the most dramatic in history, but his fall would be even more spectacular. Join us next time on History Speaks as we explore the fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Subscribe for more.